Hi, I'm Kaden Filbert, and I will be reviewing the case of Robert Long, the serial killer. This was a case that I found on Forensic Files, and it was the episode season 2, episode 1, A Common Thread. So, the victims of the case, this first one was 20 years old, and she was a female, and she worked at a nightclub. And the second victim was a 22-year-old female, and she worked as a prostitute. These were the two main victims I chose to focus on because they were the only ones in the episode that they showed the bodies for. So, in the top two photos, you can see the first victim. She was found face down, hands tied behind her back, a rope around her neck. The investigators said that there was an excessive force used whenever the victim was killed. In the picture, it's hard to see because of the coloration, but this is the only thing that was provided in the episode. Um, you can kind of see bruising from where she was tied up, but the image is in black and white, and there's shadows in the pictures. So the investigators, in my opinion, maybe could have taken more photos, or it wasn't released in the forensic file episode, so we couldn't see the other perspectives. But these were the only two photos provided in the episode. The second victim is this third picture down here, and this was the only picture provided for her. She was found hands bound, face up. It's hard to see this picture, but it was the only one that was included. So these were the only three post-mortem pictures I had. So for other victims, there were 5 other victims in total, all of whom ranged from 17-year-olds to early 20s and had some involvement in prostitution, except for the victim that got away. The victim that got away was raped, but she ended up not getting killed, and she was 17 and she didn't have any involvement in prostitution, but we'll get to that. So, one of the factors that I chose was trace evidence. One of the key things that tied all of the murders together with the rape victim was this red fiber fabric, and they were trying to figure out what it was. They did tests, and whenever they zoomed in on the microphone, you're able to see in this blue picture on the left, they all had this triangle pattern in the fiber, which they were later able to find out that was nylon. And then they did a color match, and they all had the same specific color. The bottom right photo is from inside of the car, and that's where the fiber was getting picked up from. And then the top right photo is with the color match under the microscope of the fabric. The second thing I chose was the tool markings, and so this was another vital part of the case. They found 3 different tire marks in 2 of the victims that they found at the crime scene. They were able to later tie them all together. And so what they did is they poured plaster and took an imprint of the tire marks. And what was unique is that there were 3 different kinds of tire marks at the crime scene, but they all came from the same car. So when they found this at the first scene, it was confusing. But then they found it at the second scene and were able to start tying some things together. Once they found the car of the killer later on, they were able to match all 3 different unique tires to the crime scene using the plaster markings that they took. So, the lone survivor was the big break in the case. One of the killer's victims, she was 17-year-old female, and she made it out alive. She followed his instructions and kept her blindfold on. However, she was able to pick up key things from under her blindfold. So she had the blindfold under her eyes and it was loose so she could see things underneath, and she was laying backwards. She was able to pick up a route sign that said 217 on the highway, and in between or sandwiching that sign, she was able to pick up two different hotel names. And then the killer made a stop and she was able to hear the ATM sounds from like buttons being pressed and different blinking codes that were being put out from the machine for the 24-hour service. And she was shortly after that let go. She was able to keep all this tracked in her head. And the main thing that she picked up that helped them identify the car and tie the killer to where she was with the ATM was she could look at the word Magnum and it was on his dashboard, and only one type of model of car had this emblem at the time. So this was able to be looked up. There were 450 people in the area that had this type of car, and then they were able to track based off of the location she gave them with the hotels and the route sign, the ATM, and the time of night that he would have been withdrawing. And there was only one name that matched that type of car and who had pulled from the ATM around that time. And this is how they were able to track him down and make the arrest. The conviction, Robert Long later admitted to two more murders that the police and investigators didn't even know about, so they tracked those down. So instead of the initial 8, he totaled in 10 murders. He was sentenced to death row, and the episode ends with him awaiting for his execution in Florida. Um, Overall, this episode was very interesting. I think they could have included more pictures and been a little clearer on some of the things that they found with the trace evidence. I'm not sure how they didn't expand into with the sexual assaults because he would sexually assault them before he murdered them. They didn't go into the rape kits that they could have done or anything like that. I feel like this would have been detrimental to also helping find him because if his DNA was left. But I do know if his DNA wasn't in the system, it would have been harder. But yeah, I found it overall very interesting and learned a lot about the trace evidence and how you can take the tire marks out from a crime scene. Thank you.